maybe.
So should
Yeah,
we
it's
just
only
start
2
chanting?
Do a
minutes left.
chant, then stop, and then I'll pray, and then we'll do another chant, and then we'll start. Okay.
Do you want to do this one now?
No, we'll do another one.
Which one?
You guys want it?
Yes.
We want you. Whatever you do.
You come third in the list, but not in rejection.
Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless our gathering, that we may open our hearts to your guiding wisdom, to your loving presence, that we may understand how to draw closer to your omnipresent love. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Amen. We'll chant another chant, then we'll have a few minutes of meditation before we start. receptivity and the inspiration to receive whatever divine guidance is possible for us this evening, that we may learn and welcome the learning of how to draw closer to the heart of bliss, which is our true nature. Om Shanti. Amen. Our topic this evening is just to talk about all of these agitated mental states that make our lives miserable. Nervousness and fear, it doesn't really matter what we call them. We have lots of reasons why all of these things, let me phrase it differently. We attach lots of reasons to why we have all these experiences, and we can characterize them all in all different ways. But what happens to us is that something happens that causes us to lose our ability to remain conscious of higher realities. And there's a natural fascination that we all seem to carry, which is we are very interesting to ourselves. And our own story attracts us. And so we like having our horoscope read and understanding what planet is doing what. I remember I went through a period of time and I was explaining it to my friends that I felt like my moon had gone into Hades. I didn't know if Hades was a planet or not, but that's just what it felt like. And so whatever we call it, we get interested in psychics and past life readers who can tell us, all these different details. And I'm not actually denigrating any of those things, because we get very interested in ourselves. And often knowledge or a bigger perspective about what we're experiencing gives us some way to relate to it. I had a period of time where, after I'd been traveling a lot for years, I just went into this period where if my travel companions were not with me, I actually it wasn't merely that I became anxious. I went into a state of near panic. And it got so that if people were going to leave me alone, I had to make sure that they promised that they would come back by this certain time. And if they were just a minute late, I'd be just pacing up and down waiting for them to come. It was very impressive. And I was talking in a satsang group, and I mentioned this sort of feeling that I had. This woman who has, I don't know whether she has true psychic ability or not, but she walked up to me and she said, "I can see you as a little child, and your mother died, and your father couldn't take care of you, and he took you to a railroad station and left you there." Just like that. And she just, out of nowhere, I had no relationship to that idea, but she was responding to the fact that I panicked if I wasn't with my companions when I was traveling. She said this to me out of the clear blue sky. I began to cry as soon as she said it. I mean, this is just like, after dinner, like here, when everybody's having cookies, she's telling me about my past traumas and why I was so frightened in the airports. And then I also said, that was a very hard life, but it made me very strong. All of this happened, just like that, without my having any chance to think about it. Now, true or not, the feelings of it were true. And it makes what was otherwise irrational quite sensible, that there would have been a buried grief, a buried fear that in that particular lifetime would never have been assuaged, because there I was. I was a street child, and I had to make my life work, which I had the feeling that I did, but the trauma goes into you. Now, what's so fascinating about this, you see, the trauma's not there anymore. I'm not a street child. I was born into a very supportive family. My parents have been wonderful to me, and they've helped make my life work even after they died, with money that my father earned. And so I've always been supported. And yet, there was a pattern deep inside of me that never really got fully resolved. On whatever it was, Saturday or Sunday, when we were talking about the chakras, and I was talking about the vrittis. And we have this energy self, and the energy self is really much more who we are than our physical self. And the energy self, which is the pattern in the chakras, which is another big subject, but most of you have some familiarity. The pattern in the chakras stays with us. The body dies. The circumstances of that body go away, and by God's own grace, mercy, we don't remember. But we remember the feeling, because it makes an impression on the energy body. It makes a vritti, and energy circulates around it. And moving energy has an attractive power to it. So one of the things that we have to understand to begin to work with ourselves in an intelligent manner, Master makes a very interesting statement. He said, because we live in this material world in the realm of time, and because in the realm of time one thing follows another sequentially, Master said, we think that one thing causes another, which is just a very interesting thought. I'll go back to myself in the airport. Somebody walks away from me, and I'm suddenly alone in a busy airport, and I suddenly become afraid. So I think what's caused my fear is that my companions are no longer with me. But what's actually causing my fear, conceivably, is something that really happened a long time ago, and all of a sudden I'm remembering that. But for most of my life, and for my life now, my companions could walk away from me and it didn't mean anything to me. But somehow or another that vritti got activated, and that's what began to happen. So a lot of times what's happening to us is that the feelings we're having are real. But where we get super confused is we try to make a cause and effect relationship with something that's happening more closely in time. And then we get really mixed up because we know we're having a real feeling. My fear, irrational and goofy as it was super real. I was in an energy field of tremendous fear, but nothing in my environment was actually causing it. So what I'm trying to build here is this simple fact. We have to respect the way that we feel. Meaning, whenever people come to me and they tell me, like, I know this is stupid, I know it's dumb of me, I know I shouldn't, I always stop them, We spent a lot of lifetimes getting mixed up. We've devoted ourselves to developing wrong habits and wrong feelings. And we did it always seemed like a good idea at the time, whatever it is we built up. And if we just denigrate what's bothering us and are ashamed of it, which is essentially what we're saying, I ought to be different, what that does is, as I was saying this also in the chakras class, not only now do we have the energetic pattern that's causing these dissonant feelings within us, but now we have shame, embarrassment, anger at ourselves on top of that. And I say sufficient is the problem itself. And if I have it, then it has to be dealt with. That doesn't mean it's important, that I have to put my life around it, that everybody around me has to circle around and worship what I'm worshiping. But it just means there it is. I've got it now. And so now what do I do? What we also have to deeply understand is there is no physical reality to these emotions. They are entirely and only an energy pattern. In fact, our entire consciousness is simply an energy pattern. And someday, our energy pattern is going to be a total and constant awareness of the divine presence around us. And that could happen tomorrow. Theoretically, if we could exert enough energy to change all those patterns at once, we could be liberated now. And theoretically, that's possible. In actual fact, it seems to take time. It seems that we can only generate energy at a certain speed or at a certain quantity, and what we've already established has magnetism, and the two things work in contradiction to each other, and then gradually we can sort this out. But it's vitally important if we're going to master these qualities that do not make us happy, and that's what we're talking about. They cause us to suffer. They diminish our happiness. That's the problem. And inasmuch as our deepest self knows that we were made for bliss, it feels wrong to be distracted from that bliss. And whether or not that's a conscious understanding or even an intellectual one, our inner self knows it. And that's why we're not content to suffer. It's something very interesting to think about. Because if there were no alternative to suffering, we would know that. And we would adjust to suffering because there would be no possibility of shifting it. But we know that we were made for bliss. And so everything that interrupts that bliss on some level feels wrong to us. And we rebel against it. We may not always have great energy in how we rebel against it, but we cannot rest. As someone put it just so simply, it's just not that easy to lie down and die. We might just want to give up and surrender, so you lie down, resolved to die, and after a while you get a little hungry. Or perhaps you need a personal comfort break. You have to go into the bathroom for a moment. Or you begin to wonder about your cat or whatever it is, but you just resolve that I'm just going to die of misery right here, and we just find ourselves unable to do it because something in us, and it's more than just the urge to live, it's also to come back to our divine home. So we have to deeply, and what I'm really talking about a lot here is simply right attitude. These vrittis of dissonance live in our chakras, and from time to time they get out of their cage. Because either something happens that triggers a trauma, or just somehow the cosmic balance is such that some of these vrittis just begin to come to the surface. Now, there is a divine law, and I was mentioning this with the chakras class too, that we're never given a challenge that's bigger than our ability to face it. You may feel, as I do, a great deal of sympathy with Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who said, God never gives me a challenge more than he thinks I can handle, but sometimes I wish he didn't have such a high opinion of me. So it's also very fair, even though we have to accept what our karma brings us, it's also very fair to have an opinion about it. The extraordinary example of the life of Christ has several very good examples of how to pray. And one of them is, Lord, let this cup pass from me. That's what he says. I don't want this to happen. I came to these people to bring them freedom and bliss, and they're going to respond by crucifying me, because he knew this was coming. And he naturally thought that was a very bad idea. And the pain of it was not that he was going to lose his body. He was a self-realized master, and his body was incidental to him. The pain was in his heart, because he'd come with so much compassion and love, and he knew his message was going to bring them freedom, but instead he was going to have to go through the trauma of watching them create very bad karma for themselves. That's why when he was on the cross and he saw the people who were crucifying him, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It pained him to see them create suffering for themselves. He wasn't thinking about himself at all. But he said, let this cup pass from me. But then he said, but thy will, not mine, be done. Now, I've always taken that as the perfect expression of how we can relate to God, to Guru, to our own higher understanding, which is we must be honest and authentic in how we feel. And this is why I'm wanting us first to just understand this is just an energy pattern. This is a habit that we have built up by the way we have responded to many experiences in our lives. We've built up the habit of fear. We've built up the habit of nervousness, of anger, of jealousy, whatever it might be. Because the fascinating thing, you see, is it only happens inside our head. And everybody responds differently to different circumstances. But because of what has been inside our head for a long time, we have developed a habit. And when you develop a habit, every time you act in a certain way, according to whatever vibration of understanding we have, and to react with anger or with jealousy or with fear, is to affirm a certain definition of reality. You know, this is a scary place. My body is threatened. My reputation is threatened. My wealth is threatened. My loved ones are threatened. Now, everything in life happens by the will of the divine. And everything that happens to every soul, to you and to everyone you know, is the perfect expression of the karmic necessity of whatever needs to be learned next. This is a very hard teaching. People love karma when it brings them wealth and fame. They're much less fond of karma when it brings us loss and suffering. So we really want karma to be true as long as it goes according to our egoic desires. And our idea of good means easy and pleasurable. And our idea of bad means that I or others are suffering. And we just accept that as true. But we have to stand back a little farther and say, what is the goal of life? Why was I born? Am I here merely to just sort of get by as comfortably as possible, or do I really want to grow? And what we really want to grow to is freedom. When I was younger, I always thought of a happiness. And when I met Swami Kriyananda, when I was 22, a long time ago now, and he walked into the room, and he had a quality about him that I've contemplated for decades, ever since. What did I see when he came into that room? Because I don't see auras, or I don't see into the astral world. And he was 44 years old. He was very dynamic. I want to tell you, when Jaya, who comes to India often, of course, when Jaya first met Swamiji, at around exactly that same time, 1968-69, Swamiji is American. He's white-skinned. He had long hair at that point. And Jaya describes him. Swami was closer to the years that he lived in India, and during those years he always wore Indian-style clothes, kurta, and he liked a dhoti, an orange dhoti, an orange kurta is what he would wear when he gave a public talk. So Jaya saw him in Berkeley. He's giving some kind of a public talk. He has on his orange dhoti. He has his orange kurta. He has a London overcoat, just like a very Western-style overcoat. He has a French beret. He has brown dress shoes and little orange, like athletic socks, like this. And Jaya looked at Swamiji, and his hair was long down his back like this, and his little beard. Jaya looked at him and said, I like this man. He's completely himself. That's how he put it. He just is moving through the world as he is, authentically, to his own sense of what is appropriate. I feel what I felt when Swami walked in the room was an extraordinary sense of freedom from him. And in retrospect, I realized that what I called a desire for happiness was actually a desire for freedom. That I felt compelled, bound, imprisoned by my own self. You might say the limitations of egoic identification. I mean, that's a more sophisticated way to say it. But I felt imprisoned. And I didn't understand that for a long time, because the only reality I knew was the little reality of my own mind. But some part of me remembered. Smriti was in play there. Some part of me remembered that this is not who I really am. And when Swami came into that room, he was the first person I'd seen who was not ego-identified. And so his aura was everywhere. It just was everywhere. It was a medium-sized room. I had come with companions who were willing to meet the Swami, but only from the last row. They just wanted to keep some sense of security. So we were in the farthest row of a modest-sized place, and even just sitting there before Swami spoke, I felt like he was standing right in front of me. There was no distance between his presence and me. He was just right there. And when he started talking, his energy just went through me and through the wall behind me. I remember it was the Hall of Flowers in the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and that was a very large hall, 700-800 people in that room. Large for the U.S., not as large as you have here. And because I was sort of more the entourage rather than an actual participant in the program, I actually was sitting on top of a piece of equipment against the back wall again. Swami started talking. See, this is the way the mind works. I thought, this is an excellent loudspeaker system. That was my first thought, was the equipment was working really well. And then I realized, no, it's not the equipment that's working, it's Swamiji who's working really well, because he was right there. The aura went to there, because all of those conflicting cross currents of fear, anxiety, self-concern, he'd shifted the energy pattern. That's all. But what I was going to say is, the only difference between a saint and a God-realized person and the worst criminal is their consciousness. And if we shift our consciousness, we become that saint or that good person. Even the worst murderer, if he has a revelation of God and releases all of that, he becomes saintly. So we have to hold with tremendous conviction that even when we're swept away with delusion, painful delusion, this is just an energy pattern. And all I have to do is create an alternate energy pattern. And sooner or later, if I persevere with enough strength and I behave in a way that's consistent with the way energy works, this will give up and go away. I think of it like this. Freedom is infinite, bliss is infinite, delusion is finite. Delusion may last a long time, but every time I fall into one of these negative energy places, it's one less time that I will ever do that. And here's part of the reason, which is extremely important. What we have to do is we have to change our commitment. We have to make a deep and abiding commitment to freedom. And we need to bring powerfully into our hearts that I can be free. And I mean ultimately, infinitely free, but I can be free of any energy pattern I have, because it's nothing but an energy pattern. And therefore, it's bad enough that I have to go through it. I don't have to become terribly alarmed or terribly identified about it or totally hopeless, because here we are again. Of course, here we are again, friends. We have so many levels that we don't even know. We don't know how many times we were abandoned in the railroad station and we were never able to resolve. And so now these issues are just going to keep rising. But we need to deeply know that this is temporary and bliss is permanent. And as soon as we're able, we move out of it. And we also profoundly and deeply need to have a strategy. And if we just know that it's energy against energy, we also have to realize that when these moods, emotions, fears, nervousness come to us, it's not a casual problem. Because the more we allow it to run without at least making some effort to push back against it, and of course the degree of effort we can make is variable, but some effort to push back against it, we're just dooming ourselves to having it happen again and again. So we need to realize it's an emergency. I was talking to a friend and saying she liked to camp a lot, and in certain parts of, well, you all know what poisonous snakes are like. I was thinking about rattlesnakes in the deserts of the U.S. If a rattlesnake comes in and bites you, sinks its venomous fangs into you, you don't have a long psychological conversation with yourself about why. Isn't that interesting? This is the big snake. Why didn't the smaller one come? And why did it come now? And why wasn't it yesterday? And I have relatives who are also bitten by rattlesnakes. None of that is relevant because we recognize it as a life or death situation. And so we just immediately kick into action. So when our minds start feeding us reasons why we have to be afraid or we have to be angry, and this is, Swamiji put it this way, one of Satan's tricks, if you want to think of it like that, one of Maya's tricks, is Maya persuades you that you need to take her seriously and relate to her. And so when it comes up, we sort of think that this is something that, I have to think about, I have to consider. The phrase, Swamiji was not very fond of this phrase, so he would say it like this. He said, so-and-so told me they had a lot to process. He said it like that. And he never really had a lot of support for the concept that we have to process. Now, I've also said, yes, of course, we have to understand ourselves. We have to know who we are and what we're doing. But we don't want to get sucked into the thought that we have to really relate to this. What we have to do is we have to counter it with a better energy. Okay? And on our spiritual path, on any spiritual path, we have lots of different techniques. And a couple of them that really work is music, song, chanting, affirmation. Prayer is nice too, but often when we're in the throes of an attack, we need something that is systematic and repeatable, that doesn't have to be, that is not subject to reconsideration in the moment. Okay? When I was having a period of time when I was very upset with people who were close friends of mine, but at the time I was very upset with them, and because I'm such a verbal person, and because I have an absurd commitment to reason, I thought if I could just explain it to them, they would, of course, guess what, agree with me. But of course, they weren't interested in listening to me, and in fact, they were hundreds of miles away from me. So I would just have conversations with them when they weren't in the room. Either sometimes out loud and sometimes in my head. And it was not serving me. But it was just, I would just find myself in these conversations. And my friend, Karen, who's the director of our choir, Master Swamiji has written 400 pieces of music, and more than half of them have lyrics. And some of them are, the ones I like the most are the You know, the real, just deep, gorgeous ones. And some of them are more light. And one of the lighter ones is Little Kathy. And it's for those of some of you may know it. Little Kathy goes out in the garden and she's dancing, and then she sees a fat little robin and she dances with the little robin, but the robin doesn't dance very well, so the robin persuades Kathy that, you know, or Kathy persuades the robin that it's okay, he's a fat little robin, everybody can do something, and then we all dance around the garden and we're all so happy. Has a chorus that isn't really words, that's just like this. It's not that I dislike it, but I would never think of it. So she told me, just very firmly, whenever you start those conversations, you have to sing Little Kathy. And believe me, nothing else was working. And where I live, I have an electric bicycle, and I can get around most of the places I go to on that bicycle. So I'm going down the street on my bicycle on a summer morning, and all of a sudden I realize I'm having that conversation again. So I just started singing. I'm not a particularly good singer, but I was moving fast, so nobody was really going to be hurt by it. And I just start, Little Kathy went dancing, went dancing, went dancing, and the fat little robin and the whole thing like that. Here's what was amazing to me. I could not sing that song and be upset at the same time. One absolutely precluded the other. And I think it was partly because the song was so darn silly to my ears, you know. And the more I got into it, the more the theater in me started coming out, the actress in me. And we were really, you know, doing the robin and doing the girl and the whole dancing in the garden, you know, on the bicycle. And I was perfectly happy. As soon as I stopped, I started the argument again. But wow, look at that. I just brought a completely different vibration into my world, and it was impossible to maintain the negativity in the presence of that melody. Okay? Swamiji's music is uniquely powerful in this because it's not emotional. It's deeply feeling-oriented, but it's feeling that draws you into the center of yourself instead of spinning you out into the periphery. Master's chants. I'm suggesting these instead of more conventional popular songs, which often have a more anguishing element somewhere in there. But the point is, get yourself a strategy. Little Kathy became my strategy, and fairly soon, I really just began to drop the arguments. Because every time I'd start arguing, I'd think of the fat little robin. You know, it just became associated in my mind. The antidote became associated. So that's one. Affirmations are magnificent, and there's Swami's book of affirmations for self-healing. And there's 52 different affirmations in here. And there's also prayers in here. And somehow for me, the prayers are better affirmations for me than the affirmations. I think it's because I have a devotional temperament, and so the devotion of the prayers speaks to me sometimes more than the willpower of the affirmations. Master has a little other book called Scientific Healing Affirmations, which is highly recommended. Now I want to talk just a little bit about how affirmations can work, because I also, for many years, used an affirmation, and I used the same one over and over and over and over and over. First because it worked for me, but also because it took away any decision making. I didn't have to work it out. It's just, you know, certain, and in this case what I was working with was I guess the word would be crippling, a crippling sense of insecurity about my ability to cope. Just, you know, our responses to life are not rational. It didn't really make any difference whether it made any sense, very, very deep in my nature. Now, the thing about what you want with an affirmation is you want an affirmation that is bigger than who you are now, but not too much bigger. This is how I learned this. I was counseling this woman, or she came to me. She was asking me. She had been a chemist and really, really liked her job. And she developed a serious allergic reaction to some of the substances she had to work with. So all of a sudden, the career that she was very good at, that she really liked, was in extremely serious jeopardy. And so she took a leave of absence. She did everything she could to heal herself. Now she was about to go back to work, and she came to talk to me, and she was very nervous about this. So she told me that she had an affirmation, and that affirmation was, I am strong, I am well, I am invincible, nothing is going to bother me. Just something, it was more elegant than that, but that was it. I'm going to go back in there and not be allergic. That was essentially what she was saying. I just looked at her, I said, "Do you believe that?" She said, "No." Because she'd picked something that was too far beyond what her actual emotions were. So not only would it not work, but every time she said it, her subconscious mind was telling her that it wasn't true. And so it was worse than not being effective. She was actually weakening herself by stretching herself too far. So we worked together to try to create or find an affirmation she could really believe in, which is what we came to. I am a child of God. I am loved by my Divine Mother. Whatever Divine Mother sends me, she will also give me the strength to deal with it. And so that she could really believe. And so she went back. And truthfully, I didn't know her well enough to know what happened. So I'd love to tell you, yes, it worked. But the principle was really true. So when I was working with myself, which I did for a long time on particular issues, this is the affirmation, and it's from Master, and I'm just presenting it to you because it's an example. It had 3 parts to it. I know God's power is infinite, and as I am made in His image, I too have the strength to overcome all obstacles. Because I was dealing with self-doubt, and I was dealing with fear. And so this is how it worked. I know God's power is infinite. Got that one, not a problem. I know God's power is infinite. And as I am made in His image, well, sometimes I forget, but if you ask me, wake me up in the middle of the night and ask me if I'm made in God's image, I'll say yes. My subconscious will say yes. I know God's power is infinite, and as I am made in His image. And then it gets a little dicey. I too have the strength to overcome all obstacles. But what I've done is I've trapped myself with 2 true statements, and the third one is the natural outgrowth of 2 things I can believe, and the third one I don't yet believe, but since I believe the first 2, I can't escape the third one. But I'm giving it to you in a big story. So if we're going to be effective with an antidote, it has to be an antidote that we can wholly embrace, that we can remember, and that moves us to our own next step. Rather than, there's a lot of other affirmations, and depending on who you are, depending on what will work for you, but find a formula. And when I was going through a very difficult emotions, I found a chant. And that chant was, Sri Yogananda, guide to inner freedom, steal into my heart of hearts and banish my delusions. And it had a melody that really was simple to sing, and that one was that was the generic antidote to struggle like that. And it very simple, for example, by contrast, there's a chant that Swami wrote called, I want only Thee, Lord, Thee, only Thee. I've gradually learned to be able to sing that chant. But it didn't work for me like it worked for other people, because I would think, no, I don't. I want only Thee, Lord. No, I don't. No, I don't. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. But others might find that chant just resonates with them perfectly. Now I have to say I've grown into that chant. I can sing that chant much more completely. But when I'm in trouble, I ask my beloved Guru to come in and banish my delusions. Okay, now here's the last part that we really have to realize, and this is the key to everything, in fact. Because we move in and out of attunement with the divine, we think that God is only present with us sometimes. But think about this for a minute. We're talking about God-realized masters, or Divine Mother herself, however you want to feel this, but let's think of it as the masters. They are completely free. They love us unconditionally, which is really something to think about. There is no condition that we can create that in any way diminishes their love and commitment to us. This is literally impossible for us to understand because we are different than that. They also live outside of time, outside of space, outside of life and death. Their consciousness is unchanged and eternal. So they are always radiating to us total love, total acceptance. And we believe it, and then we doubt it. And then we believe it, and then we doubt it. We focus on it, and then we forget. Like this. So we're always moving in and out of it. But the fact of the matter is, it's unchanging. And the single most helpful thing we can do in terms of all of these disharmonious feelings, the answer to all of them is, I am loved by God. I am a child of the infinite, and doesn't matter how naughty I am, doesn't matter how stupid and obnoxious and unpleasant I'm being, what an ungrateful wretch I am, His love for me is unconditional. And all of the disharmony and chaos that we create is because somehow we don't believe that. Or we don't understand what it really means. So when we are not in the grip of some negative reality, spend as much time as you possibly can just reminding yourself over and over, I am loved. Just simply that. I am loved. And I will never be able to separate myself from that love. So then I ask myself the question, and this is one of my present mantras, why do I ever worry about anything? You know, when anxiety about this or fear about that or self-doubt comes, why do I ever worry about anything? And so I use wisdom, gyan. Just talk yourself out of it. And above all, bear this in mind. Well, I've said this about 4 times. This is the most important, but nonetheless, this is the most important. Like this. Practice all the time. When we have a big issue, we also almost always, the same big energy is also manifested in lots of small ways. Again, one of my friends taught me this. She had this terrible anger against her mother, fairly justified. She was not fortunate in the mother department. She got a very hard mother, and it was tough karma. Very angry. And I sort of said, she wasn't actually a friend, she was an acquaintance. I said, well, do you have an inclination to be angry otherwise? No, not at all, she said. But as we gradually explored it, her general response to everything was anger. You know, somebody in her office leaves the coffee cups in the sink and doesn't wash them. You know, somebody doesn't take their old sandwich out of the refrigerator. Some person on the highway drives in a stupid manner and they don't like it. doesn't wash their car. I mean, just talk about it. Her response to everything was anger. She just didn't call it that. I said, well, you're not going to be able to dismantle this thing with your mother because it's just so much bigger than you are. But you can nibble around the edges of the habit. So this is the phrase that Swami gave to me, practice when it's easier. And don't feel that, well, I can just indulge myself in this nervousness or this anger or this fear. No, actually, no. Because each of those little ones keeps digging the same groove. And if you want to stop the groove, you have to start pulling back from it. So master every small expression, and you'll begin to understand the dynamic of how I get over this. Use your affirmation all the time. I must have said that affirmation, who could count? I said that affirmation bazillions of times. And then gradually, an odd thing happened. I began to believe it. I just began to believe, I can handle this. And then I drew to myself, fantastic, a friend of mine. I was expressing to her this kind of anxiety about getting it done. She just looked at him and said, Asha, you always get it done. And it was the oddest thing. I think it was at the tipping point, you see. And I thought, I do. I always do. And if I don't, it's because for some reason it didn't have to be done. So why am I worrying all the time? You build it. But I'm sure I wouldn't have I doubt if she would have said it, and I wouldn't have believed her. Except I'd said a bazillion times that God will give me the power. And so when somebody said, sure, it's just like, oh, because it was nothing but an energy pattern. And I finally balanced it like that. And then, of course, I don't mean to be depressing, but then the next one comes. But each time that you prove to yourself that I can face it and overcome it, the one after it is easier, and the one after that is easier. I don't mean it doesn't tax you to the max, but you know you can do it. That's what you want. All right, do we have any thoughts or questions that we'd like to take a few minutes for? Well, we always say the first one to ask the question gets really, really good karma. Okay. Yes, there we are.
So sometimes in these situations, I can tell myself, remind myself of these truths. Then I know that I can do it, can move out of it. But then I'm again there to stay. So basically it just keeps clashing with my belief that I can do it, but then I don't do it. Finally.
Okay, think of it as an energy pattern. Think of it as however many lifetimes, and how many times in this lifetime you've put a penny in the bank of self-doubt. By your thoughts, by your actions or lack of action, by things that other people told you, by experiences that you don't even remember. And so there's a big, the jar is full. And every time you fight against it, you take something out of here and you put it over here. And if you just keep doing that, the balance will tip. When I turned 36, and then I hate to tell people how long this takes, which was 12 years after I came onto the spiritual path, my self-concept was always just slightly against me. I mean, not horribly, but slightly against me. And I would think of my consciousness as a marble. And if you set the marble on the whatever it was slightly against me, and so it would roll down to the, oh, you poor sap, you'll never get it done side, like that. For 12 years, I fought the good fight, and then almost virtually on my 36th birthday, which is a Jupiter cycle astrologically, my subconscious mind tipped like that in my favor. And it was no big, wild, now I can do anything. But now the marbles started rolling slightly toward you can probably manage it side like that. The only reason that happened was I didn't give up. That the only way you can fail is to quit. And then you won't even really fail. You'll just lie on the floor and suffer and try to lie there and die and won't succeed. And so eventually you'll get up and start again. So as Swami said to us once, you're going to get it right sooner or later. Why waste a few million years? So just, people ask me, what's the secret of success on the spiritual path? Don't quit. Nothing less. And you have to build into yourself, first of all, that what else would I do? You need to keep vividly in front of your mind at all times what life was like before you discovered the spiritual path. You must never forget what it's like not to be on the path. And then you just say, what choice do I have? Nothing good is going to come to me from giving up, even if I do have to lie here for a while and reconsider my options. But again, reinforce, when you're not in crisis, the importance of persevering. And I have lots of encouraging words on my walls because I like words. I like them when I first wake up. I have them in the bathroom. I have them over here when I work on the printer. Someone who was staying in my room, because I'm away from home so much right now, she described all my little aphorisms as the treasure hunt of staying in my room because every so often she'd turn into a new place and I'd find some other. And I changed them. Something is true for me. But so when I wake up in the morning and I'm not in crisis, I reinforce it. And then it gets into you. You don't just wait till you're in trouble. Just reinforce it all the time. Okay? Is there any other questions? Yes?
How do you stay non-attached to your deep desires? You have a tendency or a desire which you haven't carried for a long time. You get to get attached to it when it doesn't happen for quite some time. But how do you get out of that energy pattern or that behavior?
By consistently creating the antidote. That if you can just see the metaphysics of it, the only reason it holds you is because you've added a lot of energy to it, and you can do the best you can not to add more energy, and as often as you can add the opposite. And there's also something called here that's very important, which is called the grace of God. Once you begin to make an effort to reform yourself in a divine direction, you take 2 pennies out of the jar and you put 2 pennies over here, and God drops 5 cents in. Then you take another 1 penny out and He drops 10 cents in, because you have friends in high places who are helping you. And so it isn't just your own efforts; it's also that you're now working in a divine flow, and you can remind Divine Mother that now you're being a really good boy and she should help you as much as you possibly can. That you're being a really good boy now and she should help you. See, Mommy? Look, I cleaned up my own room and you didn't even ask me. I'm a good boy, aren't I? You should make chocolate cake for my breakfast this morning. Yeah. Just play it to the hilt. It's just you and your own heart. Yeah. And don't quit. Same advice. Yeah. Is there anything else? If not, we'll have another chant and then call it an evening, okay?
Asha, we're going to dedicate this next chant to you. Your favorite, I Want Only Thee.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Let's close with a prayer. Divine Mother,
Divine.
great masters of self-realization, may thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of our devotion, and may we be able to awaken thy love in all hearts. Om Shanti Shanti.